What would you do differently today if nobody was watching? Not nobody you know. Nobody at all. No likes, no comments. No one to approve or disapprove of any choice you made. Sit with that for a moment. Because the gap between that answer and the life you are actually living is exactly the size of the approval you are still waiting for. This is Nathan, 33 years old, Brooklyn, New York. Nathan is a freelance artist and designer, by most accounts, a talented one. His work has been featured in 3 local galleries. He has clients who come back, a small but loyal following online. And yet, on most mornings, Nathan sits in front of a blank canvas and feels something that has nothing to do with art. He checks his phone before he picks up the brush. He posts his work and refreshes the screen more times than he would admit. He has abandoned pieces midway because he imagined how they would be received before they were finished. He has a folder on his laptop titled simply Private. His best work is in there, the pieces he made for no one, the ones where he forgot to perform and just painted. Nobody has ever seen them because Nathan has spent so long creating for approval that creating without it feels almost dangerous. Like standing in a room where the lights might go out and nobody would know he was there. It happened at his own gallery opening, a night that should have felt like arrival. 3 months of work on the walls, people he respected in the room, glasses of wine and genuine compliments from people who knew what they were looking at. Nathan stood near the back and watched it all, and felt almost nothing. Not ungrateful, not depressed, just strangely hollow. A painter he admired named Grace found him there. She had been showing work for 20 years, the kind of artist who had long stopped caring what a room thought of her. She stood beside him quietly for a moment, then said, "You look like a man waiting for a verdict." Nathan looked at her. She said, "I used to do the same thing, stand at my own openings reading people's faces to find out how I felt about my own work." Nathan said, "Does it go away?" Grace thought about it, then said, "It does not go away, but at some point you stop giving it the vote." Nathan drove home that night and opened his laptop, opened the folder marked Private, and looked at the work inside. And for the first time, he could see clearly that the best version of himself had been living in a folder he was too afraid to show the world, and too conflicted to show only himself. I think about Nathan's folder often, because I think most of us have one, not necessarily on a laptop, but somewhere. The opinion we kept to ourselves because the room did not feel safe enough. The project we abandoned because we imagined the criticism before we finished the work. The version of ourselves we only show when no one important is watching. The folder is not modesty. The folder is the gap between who you are and who you have decided it is safe to be. Nathan started therapy that winter, not because he was falling apart, but because Grace's words had opened something he did not want to close again. His therapist asked him one question in their first session that Nathan said he was still answering months later. She asked, "Whose approval were you first trying to earn, and do you still need it from them, or have you just transferred the need to everyone else?" Nathan's therapist used an image he came back to again and again. She said, "Think about the difference between the moon and the sun. The moon is beautiful. On a clear night, it can light up an entire field. People write poems about it. Artists have painted it for centuries. But the moon produces no light of its own. Everything you see when you look at the moon is borrowed from the sun. If the sun disappears, so does everything the moon appears to be. A person who lives for approval is the moon, bright when the light is on them, dark when it isn't. Their sense of worth entirely dependent on what is being reflected their way. The sun does not need the moon to validate its light. The sun simply burns." Nathan said that image changed something in how he saw himself, not overnight, but it gave him a direction. He wanted to be the kind of person who generated their own light, not someone who waited to see how brightly others would reflect them. Over the following months, Nathan worked through 4 principles his therapist called building an internal compass. Not 4 ways to stop caring what people think, 4 ways to care about the right things more than you care about approval. The first principle, find out what you actually think. Nathan realized he had spent so long calibrating to other people's responses that he had lost track of his own. Before he posted anything, before he showed anyone anything, he had no clear sense of whether he thought it was good. He was waiting for the verdict to tell him how to feel. His therapist gave him a practice. Before sharing any piece of work, write 3 sentences about it: what you were trying to do, whether you think you did it, what you would change. It sounds simple. For Nathan, it was one of the hardest things he had ever practiced, because it required him to have an opinion before anyone else did, and opinions without external validation felt terrifyingly exposed. The second principle, separate the work from the reception. Nathan had fused these 2 things so completely that he could no longer tell them apart. If a piece was well received, it was good. If it was ignored, it was not. His therapist pointed out that this was not a philosophy about art, it was a philosophy about popularity, and those 2 things had never been the same. She asked him to name 3 artists he genuinely admired whose best work was not their most popular. He named 5 without pausing. The work and its reception are 2 separate events. One is yours, the other belongs to everyone else. Protecting your sense of the first from the noise of the second is not arrogance, it is survival. The third principle, do 1 thing each week that no one will see. Nathan started making work in private, not for the folder this time, not hidden out of fear, hidden by choice. 1 piece per week, made with full effort, shown to no one. The first few weeks felt wasteful. What was the point of making something no one would ever respond to? And then slowly something shifted. He started to notice that these were the pieces he was most proud of, made without the distortion of imagined reception, pure signal, no noise. He did not stop sharing his work, but he stopped needing the share to justify the making. The fourth principle, let your consistency be the statement. Nathan had been trying to prove himself in individual moments, each post, each show, each reaction, a separate audition for a role he felt he had never quite gotten. His therapist reframed it. She said, approval seeking is exhausting because it requires you to win over and over again. Confidence is quieter. It does not need to win every room. It just needs to keep showing up in the rooms that matter. Nathan shifted from performing to persisting, less energy spent on any single moment, more energy spent on still being there a year from now, 5 years from now. The quiet confidence he learned was not the absence of doubt, it was the decision to move regardless of it. About a year after that gallery opening, Nathan still posts his work, still has days where he checks the numbers more than he intends, and still feels the pull of the old habit like a current beneath the surface. But something is different. He opened the private folder last spring and submitted 3 pieces to a juried exhibition he had been too afraid to apply to for 4 years. 1 was selected. Not because he had finally gotten good enough, he had been good enough for years, but because he had finally decided that his own assessment of his work was worth enough to risk it on. The night the selection was announced, he did not check his phone. He was in the studio, working on something new, something that would go in the folder first and the world second, or maybe not the world at all. Grace came to the exhibition, stood in front of his piece for a long time, then found him and said, "That is the first time I have seen you in your own work." Nathan did not say anything, but he knew exactly what she meant. The moon had stopped waiting for the sun to shine on it. It had found its own light. The approval you are waiting for will never be enough. Not because people are not generous, but because no amount of external validation can fill a space that was always meant to be filled from the inside. You already know what you think. You already know what you value. You already know which version of yourself lives in the private folder and which one you perform for the room. The quiet confidence is not something you build by becoming less sensitive. It's something you build by becoming more honest with yourself first, before anyone else gets a vote. If Nathan's story reflected something you have been living quietly, drop the word worthy in the comments. And if someone you know has been waiting for permission to show the world who they actually are, send them this. Mindshift Tales. Shift your mind, change your life.